Have you ever, wished you could just peek inside someone's mind and see how they process the world? Well, today's deep dive gets us surprisingly close, I think. We're going to be looking at a research paper, and it details this new AI model called MindSimulator. And get it, this can generate synthetic brain scans from images.
Yeah, it's pretty wild. What's really groundbreaking here is that MindSimulator could offer, neuroscientists a way to study brain activity without having to rely solely on these expensive and time-consuming fMRI scans.
So that means like no more strapping people into giant magnets just to figure out, what their brain does when they look at a picture of a cat. I mean, that's fascinating.
Precisely. And this research paper walks us through how MindSimulator works, how accurate it is, and its potential. So I guess our mission today is to break down this pretty complex topic and understand why it's such a big deal for neuroscience.
Okay, so let's unpack this mind simulator. How does it actually, how does it turn a simple image into something that resembles brain activity data?
Well, MindSimulator is what we call a generative model. Think of it like, a talented art forger. You give them enough examples of a painter's work, and they can create a new piece that looks convincingly like the original artist's style.
All right, like,
Well, MindSimulator does the same thing, but with brain scans. It learns all these patterns from a massive data set of real fMRI scans that are paired with images. It's called the Natural Scenes Dataset, or NSD. And then, get this, it can generate synthetic fMRI data based on new images.
that's a great analogy. But under the hood, the paper mentions it has these three main components:
hmm
the fMRI autoencoder, the diffusion estimator, and the inference sampler. I'm guessing it's a bit more complicated than just looking at images.
Yeah, you're right. It is pretty sophisticated. Imagine the fMRI autoencoder, like a language translator,
Right.
It takes this complex fMRI data full of brain activity signals, and it kind of converts it into this simpler, more abstract code that the model can actually, understand.
So it's basically like condensing the brain scan into a more manageable format.
Exactly. And that condensed code is then fed into the diffusion estimator. That's where things get, really interesting.
Okay.
The diffusion estimator, it's like a sculptor who starts with a block of clay, in this case, random noise, and just slowly refines it, guided by that input image, until it produces a sculpture that actually represents, the brain activity you'd expect to see when someone looks at that image. But instead of a sculpture, it produces a synthetic fMRI representation.
So it's not just like copying existing scans, it's generating this new data that reflects what the brain might do when presented with a certain image.
Right. And then the final step, that involves the inference sampler. This component takes that synthetic fMRI representation and it translates it back into a format that looks just like a real fMRI scan, kind of like adding those final touches, making it look like, a genuine product of a brain.
Got it. So we've got our synthetic brain scan.
hmm
But how do we know if it's actually any good? Can it really stand in for the actual, like the real fMRI data?
That is the million-dollar question. And the researchers, the ones behind MindSimulator, they were really meticulous in their testing. They evaluated the accuracy of the model on two levels. First, they looked at the voxel level. Imagine a brain scan as, a giant 3D grid, right?
Right.
And each tiny cube in that grid is a voxel. They checked how closely each individual voxel in the synthetic scan matched those in a real fMRI scan.
So they're making sure each tiny piece of the puzzle is in the right place. That seems pretty thorough.
It is, but they didn't stop there. They also wanted to know if the synthetic data actually captured the meaning behind brain activity, not just the, statistical similarities. And that's where the semantic level comes in.
Okay, semantic level. What exactly does that mean?
All right, so imagine showing someone a picture of a beach and then looking at their brain scan. You'd expect certain regions of the brain to just, light up, right?
Oh,
Specifically areas that process scenes and colors and maybe even like emotions related to beaches.
right, because different areas of our brain are specialized for processing different kinds of information.
Exactly. So at the semantic level, the researchers, they tested if you could take that synthetic fMRI data, decode it, and actually reconstruct the original image the model was based on. If it works, it means the synthetic scan isn't just statistically similar, it's actually capturing the brain's interpretation of the image.
So they're seeing if they can read the synthetic brain scan and figure out what the mind of Mind Simulator saw. That's pretty wild. And did it work? Were they able to reconstruct the images?
The results were astounding. MindSimulator just aced both the voxel and semantic tests. It even outperformed some existing models that, try to directly predict brain activity from images. They even included a side-by-side comparison in figure 4 of the paper. You can see the original image and then the image reconstructed just from the synthetic fMRI data.
Okay, I'm looking at figure 4 right now. Wow. I mean, the reconstructed image is surprisingly detailed. I can make out specific objects and shapes. It's not just like a blurry mess or something. This is really impressive.
It is. And this demonstrates that MindSimulator isn't just mimicking random brain fluctuations, it's encoding real information about what the brain is processing.
This is all super cool, but I'm curious, like, what can we actually DO with this synthetic fMRI data? Is this just like a neat trick, or does it actually have some real-world applications?
That's where it gets really exciting. One of the most, I think, promising applications is in pinpointing what are called concept selective regions in the brain.
Okay, break that down for me. What are concept selective regions?
Um, think of it this way. When you see like a cute puppy, right? A specific part of your brain that's dedicated to processing like cuteness that lights up. So that's a concept selective region for cuteness. Different parts of the brain are specialized for processing all these different types of information, whether it's, faces, places, objects, or even like more abstract concepts.
So MindSimulator can help us map out which parts of the brain respond to different concepts.
Exactly. Traditionally, finding these regions involved running tons of expensive fMRI scans on real people. But now we can just use MindSimulator to generate tons of synthetic fMRI data for all sorts of images and concepts. It's like having a virtual brain to experiment on.
So researchers can test out their different hypotheses about how the brain works without being limited by, the practical constraints of real-world experiments. That's pretty game-changing.
It is. And the researchers behind MindSimulator, they put this to the test. They used their model to try and replicate the findings of, some previous studies on these concept selective regions. And guess what?
I have a feeling it worked.
You're right. MindSimulator was able to accurately identify the same concept selective regions that had been found through, all those traditional fMRI studies. But they didn't stop there. Why limit yourself to what's already been studied when you can generate data for anything you can imagine, right?
Okay, so they started exploring like new uncharted territory in the brain. What kind of concepts did they actually look at?
They looked at regions that activate when you see images of planes, food, beds, even surfers.
Surfers. That's weirdly specific. It makes you wonder, like, what other unexpected concepts have their own dedicated brain regions?
Exactly, and the findings are visually stunning. Figure 8 in the paper, it shows all these images of these localized regions for these different concepts. You can see how these distinct areas of the brain light up for each concept. It's like a colorful map of how our minds categorize the world.
This is all really mind-blowing. It seems like MindSimulator could help us create a complete concept atlas of the brain, like mapping out all the different regions that correspond to different ideas and objects.
That's the dream. But how can we be sure that MindSimulator is actually pinpointing the right areas and not just picking up on random noise?
Right, good point. It all seems almost too good to be true. Did they do anything to validate the model beyond just comparing the images?
They did. They conducted what are called voxel ablation experiments. It's a pretty clever technique where they essentially masked the identified concept selective regions in the synthetic fMRI data. Then they tried to decode the masked data and see if the reconstructed image was actually missing the corresponding object. Figure 9 in the paper gives a really clear example of this.
So if they masked the surfer region, the reconstructed image wouldn't have a surfer in it. That's a pretty convincing way to show they've located the right area.
Exactly. And that's precisely what they found. This technology really does seem to, live up to its hype. It's a significant leap forward for neuroscience research.
Okay, so MindSimulator can create these, realistic brain scans, identify concept-selective regions, and even explore new concepts. It sounds like it could unlock this whole new level of understanding about how our brains actually work. This is definitely some seriously exciting stuff. But before we get too carried away, are there any limitations to this technology? And ethically, are there any risks we should be aware of?
Yeah, you bring up some crucial points. Like any tool, MindSimulator definitely has its limitations, and understanding those is key to using it responsibly. As for the ethical aspect,
Well, let's save that discussion for part 2 of our deep dive.
Sounds like a plan. Okay, so before we dive into the limitations and the, potential risks, there's one more exciting aspect of MindSimulator we haven't really touched on yet, and it's its ability to generalize.
Generalize? You mean like it can create brain scans for anything, not just the types of images it was trained on?
Exactly. Remember, it was trained on the natural scenes data set,
Yeah.
right? Lots of pictures of everyday environments. But what happens when we show it something totally different?
Right.
Well, the researchers, they tested that, using two other image data sets. They're called CFAR-10 and CFAR-100. And these data sets contain images of things like cars and animals and airplanes.
Okay, so very different from natural scenes.
Yeah.
Did it still work?
It did. Even with these very different images, MindSimulator was still able to generate synthetic fMRI data that accurately, reflected how the brain might actually respond.
That's remarkable. It means the model isn't just memorizing specific images from that training data. It's learning something fundamental about how the brain processes visual information in general.
Precisely. And this ability to generalize, it's crucial for the future of neuroscience research because it means we can use MindSimulator to study a much wider range of concepts and stimuli. We're not limited to just what happens to be in a particular data set.
It's like having a universal key to unlock the secrets of the brain. But even with this amazing potential, you mentioned there are some limitations. What are some of those?
Well, one challenge is improving the spatial resolution of the synthetic fMRI data. Right now, MindSimulator, it can only generate data at a relatively coarse scale.
So it can tell us which general areas of the brain are active, but not the precise location of like every single neuron.
That's right. And for some research questions, that level of detail is really crucial. Think of it like trying to understand a city by looking at a map, versus actually walking down each individual street. Both give you valuable insights, but the level of detail is definitely different.
Makes sense. So higher resolution would be even more powerful.
Hmm?
But that's probably a tough nut to crack. What other challenges are the researchers facing?
Another big one is incorporating temporal dynamics into the model. So right now, MindSimulator treats each image as like a snapshot in time.
Okay.
But in reality, our brains are constantly processing information over time.
So we need a way to capture the flow of information in the brain, not just a static picture of activity.
Exactly. Imagine trying to understand a movie by only looking at a single frame. You'd miss all the action and the story, right? Capturing brain activity over time, it's essential for understanding how we think and how we learn and experience the world.
Yeah, it sounds like a pretty daunting challenge. Are there any, I don't know, any promising avenues for solving this?
There are. Researchers are exploring techniques like recurrent neural networks, which are specifically designed to handle sequences of data. Think of them as being able to, remember previous information and then use it to interpret what comes next, kind of like how our brains do.
Okay, so it seems like there's still a lot of work to be done, but the progress so far is incredible. But now, let's finally tackle those ethical considerations that we, touched on earlier. What are some of the potential risks that we need to be aware of as this technology, develops?
That is a critically important question. One concern is definitely the potential for misuse. If MindSimulator can generate brain activity based on images, could it be used to manipulate people's thoughts or invade their privacy? Imagine if someone could create, the synthetic fMRI data that makes it look like you're thinking something you're not.
That sounds like straight out of a sci-fi movie. Are we even anywhere near that level of sophistication yet?
Not quite. But it's not too early to start thinking about these potential risks and establishing, safeguards to prevent misuse. It's important to remember that this is a powerful tool, and like any tool, it can be used for good or for ill. It all depends on the intentions of the people who are actually using it.
That's a pretty sobering thought. So what can we do to make sure that this technology is used responsibly?
I think open dialogue is crucial. We need to have these conversations about the ethical implications, involve experts from all sorts of different fields, and then create clear guidelines for research and development. Transparency is key too, like making sure that the workings of these models are well understood and accessible to, scrutiny.
It sounds like we need a really proactive approach, like anticipating potential issues before they even arise. We can't just wait and see what happens. We have to shape the development of this technology, responsibly. But are there any potential positive ethical implications we can be hopeful about?
Absolutely. Think about the field of medicine. By understanding how the brain processes information at this level of detail, we can potentially develop much more targeted and effective treatments for brain disorders.
So instead of treating the symptoms, We could potentially address the root causes of conditions like Alzheimer's disease, Parkinson's disease, or even mental health disorders.
Exactly. Mind Simulator could be a powerful tool for personalized medicine, tailored to each patient's unique brain. It's not just about fixing what's broken, it's about understanding how each individual brain works and finding the best way to, support its health and well-being.
That's a really powerful and hopeful thought. It seems like Mind Simulator could not only help us understand the brain, but also like revolutionize how we care for it. But beyond just the medical applications, are there any other potential benefits we might see, down the line?
Yeah, one particularly exciting area is education. Imagine if we could use Mind Simulator to create like personalized learning experiences, tailored to each student's strengths and weaknesses. We could potentially identify the best ways to present information, design engaging activities, and even predict which students might need extra support.
That could transform education. Instead of this one-size-fits-all approach, we could create learning environments that truly cater to individual needs and help every student reach their full potential. But wouldn't this require an even deeper understanding of how the brain learns than we currently have?
Absolutely. And that's where Mind Simulator comes in. It offers us this powerful tool to investigate the intricacies of learning and memory, to understand how different brains learn best, and to design educational strategies that are truly effective.
This is pretty mind-blowing. We've gone from creating synthetic brain scans to potentially revolutionizing education. It seems like Mind Simulator has the potential to impact so many aspects of our lives. But before we get too carried away, it's important to acknowledge that, we're still in the early stages of this technology. There's a lot we still don't know about the brain. And Mind Simulator, while it's incredibly powerful, it's just a tool, right?
Yeah, that's a crucial point. It's easy to just get, caught up in the excitement of these new discoveries, but we really need to approach this with, I think, a healthy dose of caution and humility. The brain is incredibly complex, and even with these sophisticated models like Mind Simulator, we're really just scratching the surface of its mysteries.
It's a good reminder that science is a process of, continuous exploration and discovery. There will always be more questions than answers, and I think that's what keeps things interesting. But speaking of questions, this whole discussion has raised some pretty big ones for me. We're talking about, simulating brain activity, mapping out concepts in the brain. It makes you wonder about the nature of consciousness itself. If we can create a model that mimics how the brain works, are we getting closer to understanding what it means to be conscious?
That's a really profound question, and one that philosophers have grappled with for centuries. I don't think we have a definitive answer yet, but Mind Simulator definitely, pushes us to think about these fundamental concepts in new ways. It blurs the lines between the physical and the mental, between the brain and the mind.
It's almost like we're stepping into this realm where science fiction meets reality. But even if we can't fully answer the question of consciousness, it seems like Mind Simulator could at least give us more clues about how our brains create, our subjective experiences of the world.
Absolutely. And it might even challenge some of our existing assumptions about how the mind works. For example, we talked earlier about creating this concept atlas of the brain. While that's a fascinating idea, we need to be careful about oversimplifying things.
Yeah, I see what you mean. It's tempting to think we can just neatly map out every concept in the brain, but the reality is probably much, messier than that.
Exactly. Concepts aren't like isolated islands in the brain. They're all interconnected in these intricate webs of meaning. Think about the example of the surfer region, that we discussed earlier. It's not just about recognizing a person on a surfboard. It also involves understanding the concepts of ocean, waves, balance, maybe even the thrill of like riding a wave. All those related concepts are likely activating this whole network of brain regions, not just a single isolated spot.
It's like trying to understand a symphony by just listening to individual notes. You need to hear how they all work together to create the full experience.
That's a great analogy. And that's, I think, what makes the brain so fascinating. It's not this collection of separate parts. It's a dynamic, interconnected system where everything is, influencing everything else.
So while Mind Simulator gives us this amazing new tool to explore the brain, we need to remember that it's still just a model. It's a simplification of a much more complex reality.
Exactly. It's a powerful tool, but it's up to us to use it wisely and, interpret its results carefully. We need to be aware of its limitations and avoid jumping to conclusions.
It's like any map it can guide us, but it's not the territory itself. We still need to explore and discover for ourselves.
Well said. And that, I think, is the most important takeaway from our deep dive into Mind Simulator. It's this remarkable technological achievement, but it's ultimately up to us as humans to decide how we use it and what it means for, our understanding of ourselves.
We have a responsibility to explore this new frontier, with curiosity, but also with caution and a deep respect for the complexity of the human mind.
Absolutely. And who knows what other, incredible discoveries await us as we continue to delve deeper into the mysteries of the brain.
That's the beauty of science. It's this never-ending journey of discovery. So keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep diving deep. Thanks for joining us on this incredible journey into the world of Mind Simulator. Until next time.